Hi, I'm Alan Ross, and we are at Distributech 2025. We've got interviews with thought leaders, and we'd love for you to see what we've done here. Hey, thanks for joining us. My next guest is Casey Werth. We've done this before, Casey.
Indeed, we have.
Was a year ago or 2 years?
I think it was a year ago. It's great to be back.
Has anything changed since a year ago? First of all, with you and what you do, but for those guests who have not heard the other one,
sure,
we're not going to force them to talk a little bit about what you do.
Yeah, sure. So in IBM, I lead our global industry around the energy sector. And of course, that's across our services and solutions, et cetera, and lead partnerships and engagement with regulators and industry bodies in support of the energy sector.
How long has IBM been doing that?
Decades.
Okay.
For sure, yeah. And members of our research for even longer than that, maybe not directly engaged, but we have a very long relationship with DOE and the labs. And so it's been a very important sector for the company for a very long time.
Okay. I believe, and I've seen it here, and everybody I've talked to, I've seen more change in the power industry, particularly at the utility level, in the last couple of years than I've seen in the 20 before that. A real willingness to open and say, we got problems, we can't scale, we've got load growth, we've got variable growth on the load, we have all of these things happening and we need help. And they're asking experts for that, right? Have you seen kind of a culture shift in how utilities work with you?
Yeah, I think so. And I would agree with the sentiment that there is obviously a recognition of there being great transformational forces at play.
Right.
Certainly the growth in data center load and the explosion of AI, first for what AI can do for our sector, but then the impact that data center growth will have on load. I think there's a lot of, I'm not going to say concern, but maybe even excitement about what that means for opportunities to grow the sector, because we went through a pretty long period of stagnated growth, and the idea of electrification of our industry was one potential lever that was going to expand our sector. But I think data centers and now the growth of AI is really maybe a catalyst for some necessary transformation of how we run our grids and how we do our business because of that growth that is finally arriving.
Do you think that we're caught by surprise? I mean, it feels like to me like they were going, oh, darn, we didn't know this. Yeah. The Southern Company is reporting 8% annual growth. Yeah. Thank goodness they just opened a nuclear reactor. Right?
Yes, exactly.
But the idea that there's just this upon us and now we're all trying to scale and we're using technology to do things differently. That's to me the big difference. The companies are saying, hey, we got to get from here to there.
Yeah.
And if you've got new technology that helps us get there, is IBM working in that vein?
Absolutely. And I agree with you that it does seem to have been, our sector is very good at transforming and adapting, but maybe not at the speed that is being asked of us right now.
Right.
And I think but on the other hand, a lot of innovation is driven from the sector. And I think that we will achieve what we need to be able to support that. But you're right, there needs to be different modes of operation. And I think that you can look at a couple different areas where, if we look at transmission growth and the requirements we have there, we know that permitting and siting and supply chain have impacts on the ability to build new transmission. But from a technology perspective, with dynamic line rating, and now moving towards using AI and other models to model what discrete weather conditions are on a line, we can push a lot more margin on existing assets than we used to ever be comfortable doing.
Right.
Because now the data is allowing us to be able to push beyond, let's say, the standard engineering parameters of an asset,
right,
which we need to be able to do. So if we have to wait for the big iron, we can do more with the data that we were able to do in the past, as an example.
Retrofitting the existing system just because you know what's happening in the system.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. And there is, we had an earlier meeting and we were talking about that when transmission meets fiber, because now we've got to get power to where it goes, and then we got to get data. So those two are coming together, right? A lot more, which changes everything, because that's not one industry. That's multiples coming in together, right?
Yeah, and it's funny. We in IBM, of course, we support all sectors of industry, but certainly I think it's I remember when I first joined, we used to have the comm sector in IBM, and it was always the telcos and the energy business from a reporting line. But we would sort of tongue-in-cheek say, well, just because they both have poles and lines doesn't mean they're the same business. But moving data to provide visibility to conditions on a grid, of course, is a critical piece of what we do in the energy business. And I think there's things we can learn from other sectors who have moved maybe a little bit faster than we have. As an example, the telcos over a decade ago recognized that the black box of software and hardware that they were buying from their vendor base was not in their best interest, and they wanted to disaggregate software and allow for interoperability of software across the hardware they were buying. That was born out of OpenStack and some projects that have now gone into Red Hat from a software perspective. We're now doing that with the VPAC Alliance in our industry, with Dell and Intel and Red Hat and IBM are supporting, which is really looking at how do we bring virtualized capabilities into very traditionally hardware-focused capabilities around substation, which we need to be able to move with speed and interoperability.
Yeah, excellent.
Yeah.
So, because that's the collaboration point that I say, that there's companies collaborating, they're not necessarily fighting each other, they're saying, and part of that collaboration comes about where I hear the word outcomes. We're not interested in buying something from here. Here's the outcome we want to have. Can you give us that outcome?
Yeah.
That's being driven at a lot of the utilities at the C level.
Yes.
Don't tell me at the process. Unfortunately, a lot of public service commissions have not gotten there yet. It's like, oh, just tell us how you want to rate it.
Yeah.
So they're not just buying hardware anymore. They're buying outcomes.
Yes.
And it's happening, let's say, at speed, and everybody's trying to go to it. Next question.
Yeah.
It's and this is an opinion that I'm asking you to comment on. Okay. We're not going to be able to get to the scale we need to get to with everything we're doing right now. So there needs to be some technology innovation that we don't know about yet that's happening out there that you're working on with other people and saying, hey, if we could do this, we can get it to scale. Is that a fair statement?
Yes. I think that there will be opportunities to transform traditional processes with new technologies. Absolutely. I think that, though, we're really good as a sector keeping the lights on.
Right. Yes.
Figuratively and symbolically. And so I don't fear that even with the significant growth we have, this industry is really good at figuring out a way to work within the bounds of what's available from physics as well as security and figure things out. However, I would say, to use an example first, and it kind of fits two of the themes we've already covered of collaboration, but also imagining new ways to get things done that we have in the past, is bringing capabilities around AI foundation models to look not at language and chatbots, but to look at, can we understand AC power flow and network conditions to allow for far broader simulation capabilities, not with physics-based models, which are very powerful but very compute intensive, but using software to provide a much broader view of potentialities, which would allow for mitigation and planning. Now, that's the sort of thing that it changes in terms of infusion of renewables, increased reliability, and increasing our margin utilization of assets that we can't do right now just because we are sort of bounded by physics. And so that's something that we're trying to drive in the industry with a very large group of labs and utilities and regulators and others to try to come together and build these models for the betterment of the industry, because we need those sort of step changes.
I knew it was going to happen. I said comment on it, but data. Yeah. We used to sell transformers, and you bought a transformer, and then you bought a transformer, you bought a DGA or a hydrogen monitor, and then you decided you're going to put bushing monitors on it. Now you can buy 23 different monitors and sensors. That's a lot of data, and everybody's now talking about we got to have more data, we got to be able to capture the data, we got to make decisions on the data. Talk a little bit about that, because that's kind of where Watson is. I see putting a Watson in every substation in the world, and the Watson can say, hey, you're not doing it right.
That would be, I think that'd be great for our business. I don't know if it would, one of my favorite quotes over the last year was a CIO saying, I don't think everything needs a chatbot. And I don't know if every substation needs a chatbot, but I think definitely every utility needs to understand it's sort of like the known knowns, the unknown knowns, and the unknown unknowns. What would we do differently if we were able to infuse a process with more data? And I think that we on the vendor side, to be honest, talk a lot about we can bring you more data, but there needs to be a level setting of the capabilities of an organization to bring that in and fundamentally change a process. And I think sometimes looking at enterprise broad strokes of data utilization versus picking discrete examples where we can bring in some insight that we don't do in the process now, and then look, have we fundamentally changed for either a revenue improvement, a cost mitigation, or resiliency, or standard that we can improve against? And I think when we get to that level, you start to be able to germinate a broader data program about infusing. But if you start at the very high level, oftentimes to be where I've seen, those tend to either, I don't say fizzle out, but they're challenging because there's organizational inertia to move towards that. Versus, I give the example of one of our partners who just said, we want to be able to call the peak in the day better because we have 6 shots in our DR gun, and we got to use them on the right days. And if we run out, we have a significant cost challenge. And so they looked at their forecast, they looked at the weather, and then they brought in real-time data, but they never actually brought some of these data sets out of the vertical package they sat in, the software, and aggregated them above the top. And when they did that, they realized we've called the peak perfectly. It's 23 out of 24 months. The 1 month they missed it, they didn't trust the model.
Oh.
And the people disregarded the data.
That's fun.
But it's very easy to get done. Huge impact in terms of cost mitigation, in terms of having to buy on the market. But it's an example now using that at a senior level within an organization to say, hey, let's do more because we got a great win.
Right. That's an outcomes-based solution, which happens. And that's what they're asking.
And the map's easy because you can say, we've paid this, but we've saved this. So let's do more of that.
Yeah. The cost of doing everything, because there's an affordability model that comes in there. Because people say, but they just keep throwing money at it. It's doing it affordably, right? Making sure that we're doing that. So one of the things that is the total cost of ownership, that whole 9 yards. But one of the things is focus on just transformers for a little. 3 to 4 years for power transformers. Industrials they didn't buy slots 5 years ago, 3 years ago, 2 years ago. So suddenly they're going and saying, hey, I got a couple of transformers I need. I have one spare, it has no bushings on it, and the oil's been out of it for 10 years.
What do I do?
When do I get a transformer? And they say, 3 years from now. And their steel company or their plant that makes paper or whatever it is, or God forbid a data center, they're saying, what do I do? Well, what I would say is before you need it, take what you've got and make it last longer. Every utility is taking their existing infrastructure and saying, how do we get more life out of it? Which then says data. Okay, we got to bring it in, and we got to say, what do we need to do to keep that transformer running another decade? Because they're not talking about another 2 years. They're talking decades. And which ones, if we have to replace, because we get 3 transformers, let's make sure that
where's my greatest risk?
Exactly. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, I mean, obviously, with IBM, we're very proud of our Maximo portfolio, which is a key piece of our portfolio around asset management and that. And exactly, I think in prior years, the industry at large talked a lot about moving to predictive maintenance. That's it's a great aspiration, but fundamentally condition-based maintenance, even getting to that from cycle-based or time-based, is a huge win. And to your point, if we move towards analytics that allow us to say, of these 20 that I got to keep all running for the next 10 years, these 3 are the ones I really need to, because you're always going to have a planned outage is going to have also impact to your resiliency program, et cetera. So understanding whatever we can from our historical utilization, as well as now we're trying to bring in that portfolio more and more historical asset class data to provide better analytics to everyone. We're working with partners to bring more data into that, to say, historically, we've seen this model with this situation look like this is going to be your failure profile, to exactly not, I wouldn't say sweat the asset, but improve the ROA to the maximum.
No, it's all right to sweat the asset.
But you brought up another idea about using data. There was, I can't remember the firm, so I apologize, which of the startups had this story, but I was at a conference earlier this year, and they were talking about using AMI data to look at actual real-time load, and then looking at where transformers are overbuilt for the actual load, and saying, hey, let's swap this one for this, And that's another way of saying, if I can't build new, let me make sure I'm efficiently using the assets I have.
Which is a brilliant way of using AMI data, because that's the end of the grid. The exact grid edge, there you are.
And oftentimes you said we instrument, but fundamentally in the distribution grid, we don't oftentimes have that visibility, certainly not a usability in real time, but if we know it's attached on the back end, it's pretty easy math to go upstream and go, hey, we got capacity we could use here.
Right. Last question. Sure. Be a futurist for me, okay? we've had all this change. We are where we are right now. We're all reacting to it. What's next? What do you see 5 to 10 years for the industry? More of the same, just scaling? Or do you see that there's something that we're not really looking at that's going to change all of this, or a technological evolution?
I watched the keynote last year where there was a lot of talk about agentic AI replacing many things in our lives. I wouldn't say that I'm necessarily that bullish on so many new functions being replaced by everything, but I think even before 5 to 10 years, in the very short term, within 2 years, we in the vendor space in this area, in this sector, are going to be embedding a lot of new technology and tools that are very akin to or agentic AI in these packages.
Explain agentic AI.
Well, yeah, basically you would have processes that can now be automated within a workflow that normally would be, and I'm not saying it would take someone's job, but it is something that's a manual process. So now you would be able to either interface not in the application, but rather with sort of above the top, right, with hooks to go activate something. And I think our sector will need to get very good very quickly at orchestrating agents and orchestrating AI bots within the packages, because they're all going to be present in our environments. And so how do we use them within the vertical application that we've been provided by a vendor, but how importantly do we connect? Because we're really good at data integration, but now we're going to be integrating AI engines.
Right.
That is a new muscle that I think this sector will need to develop, and it will drive even more efficiency and hopefully better data integration. But of course, there's going to be a learning curve there.
Okay, I said that was last question, but I have last question. You talked about Red Hat and IBM and others working together. Just talk a little bit about how that process came up, because that in and of itself is different, because you get a lot of people saying, no, this is mine, I got my thing. Utility, you're saying, we don't want one person to we want a solution, we want an outcome that does this. Talk a bit about the idea of collaboration with other companies and coming up with a common solution.
I was not near the genesis of the VPAC Alliance, so I won't speak to sort of because there are others who were in the room when it happened, to quote Hamilton. But I think that it's from our perspective, it's really about where can we invest time, people, energy, expertise in the modernization and the uplifting of the way that our industry really runs software. And the reality is that our technology stack across a lot of the really key OT systems has not followed with cloud native technologies and Kubernetes and all the sort of things that cloud allows for.
Yeah.
And the benefits of that, which allows for much speedier integration, deployment, and very importantly, upgradability.
Okay.
We know that, some of the really core systems, once we deploy them, they may not get touched for a decade. That allows for a calcification of systems. And if we can bring in the base layer of how these applications run, being something that's cloud native, to use a somewhat overall term, but it's important. That's where we're trying to help provide a little bit of impetus to help a step change the sector. The vendor side sometimes needs a little push, meaning if we can show the utilities this is good for you, and then they can start to put that in RFPs, we can all sort of move quickly together.
Yeah.
Using the example from telco as an example of another industry that kind of needed a nudge and then flew past us. So that's the idea.
That was the last question. So,
Great.
Casey, thank you so much.
Pleasure. Great to see you.
Okay, good to see you.